You're watching Linktown TV.
What's up? You're watching Linktown TV. This is another episode of BLACKUARY, and today we got the brother Frederick Douglass. Frederick was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. He would not be Frederick Douglass until September 1838 when he escaped to the north. He dropped two middle names and changed his last name to Douglass. Born sometime around 1817 or 1818, his birthplace was likely his grandmother's cabin. His exact birthday is unknown. He chose to celebrate February the 14th as his birthday for Harriet Bailey. Mama nicknamed him Little Valentine. Frederick Douglass' father could possibly be Captain Anthony. Captain Anthony was the clerk of a rich man named Colonel Lloyd. Lloyd owned a plantation, hundreds of men, women, and children at the so-called Great House Farm. Plantations in America are brutal, overworked, exhausted. The brother Frederick Douglass went through it. No food, no clothes, no beds. The plantation owners were always tripping. Part of Frederick's experience was watching those who broke rules, and even those who didn't break rules, beaten, whipped, and sometimes even shot by the plantation overseers. The cruelest overseers in Frederick Douglass' eyes were Mr. Sevier and Mr. Austin Gore. And again, I encourage you to do your independent research on the conditions and brutality of the transatlantic slave trade. Frederick Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies: Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, also My Bondage, My Freedom, and the 3rd autobiography, Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. Those primary sources of history always hit different. Frederick Douglass is definitely one of the GOAT orators and writers. His speech, eloquent. His penmanship, exceptional. Frederick Douglass broke stereotypes of his oppressors. The stereotypes of our people are disparaging, to say the least.
Something out there, like I know they call you to like one of the first responders.
It's Black History Month, so it's that time.
It's in his bag.
Because they thought Negroes couldn't read and write. They thought Negroes didn't have the capacity to read and write. And yet they made all the laws to stop us from learning how to do what? Read and write.
Talk to
If
him.
we can't read and write, what you trying so hard to stop us for?
Big Mark.
And the answer is because America has always known what you are. America has always known who you are.
Let's go.
America has understood what you're capable of, and they will make you think you ain't nothing at the same time that they exploit your gifts. They'll tell you lazy and make you a slave. They'll tell you dirty and have you clean their
Right.
house. They'll tell you uncivilized, and we raise their children.
Oh my God, Dr. Mark Lamont
They
Hill.
know who you are.
Doctors in the building.
Hello.
But it's time that you listen to who you are.
Hey.
Dr. Mark Lamont Hill is a contemporary orator, writer, activist, and an abolitionist who questions the bondage of others. Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist who questioned his own bondage. As a child, he worked in the house. At the age of 7, Frederick Douglass moved to Baltimore by force. He was in the custody of Hugh Auld, Captain Anthony's relative. In time, he would watch Hugh Auld's wife, Sophia, transform. Sophia began to teach Frederick Douglass how to read. Sophia stopped abruptly in submission to her husband's objection. Hugh Auld was shook. He knew the power of reading. Even without Sophia, Frederick Douglass went on to read and write with the help of some of the local kids in Baltimore. The more he reads and writes, the more power. Douglass becomes conscious of the evils of slavery and of the existence of the abolitionist movement. The abolitionist movement took place from about 1783 to 1888. The abolitionist movement was a campaign to end slavery in the Americas and Western Europe. Future abolitionists will include people like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. With this newfound love of learning and abolition, Frederick Douglass resolved to escape to the north. It wasn't until he was rented to Edward Covey for a year when he experienced a shift. Frederick Douglass broke down. Edward Covey was known for breaking. 6 months, Frederick Douglass became discouraged, angry, and gave up on freedom and learning. Frederick Douglass broke down. He ended up choosing violence and had a 2-hour fight with Covey. I don't know if you ever fought anybody, but even a 3-minute street fight is exhausting. After that fight though, Edward Covey learned to keep his hands to himself. Douglass would finish the year with Edward Covey and be rented out again. At the next location, Douglass had greater ambition for learning and freedom. He would go on to bond with other people in bondage. Brother Frederick would teach in the homes of the free black people. Frederick Douglass conspires with 3 men to escape. Douglass is betrayed and incarcerated, then returned to Baltimore. He works alongside white workers who fear losing their jobs. The whites felt the increased population of black people jeopardized the job security. They feared Frederick Douglass even though he was only an apprentice and still enslaved. The fear materialized into violence and Douglass was forced to switch shipyards. Without struggle, there is no progress. Frederick Douglass finesses Hugh Alt to hire out his own free time for his own money. Who Alt Goofat really went for it. Frederick Douglass would stack his paper and eventually escape to New York. Frederick Douglass doesn't go into details about his escape. Frederick wanted to protect the interests of those who still had intentions and dreams of escape and freedom. While on the run, he changed his name from Bailey to Douglass. Frederick Douglass changed his name because he feared being recaptured in the North.
Police all I watch you. See it? The feds good I watch you, right? Blood clot, no.
I ain't going back to jail, dog. I ain't going back to jail. Next time the county or the state see me, it's gonna be in the bag.
Douglass would go on to marry Anne Murray. Douglass met Sister Anne Murray as a free woman in Baltimore. Frederick Douglass and Anne Murray would eventually move to Massachusetts. Frederick Douglass and Anne Murray had 5 children: Rosetta Douglass, Lewis Henry Douglass, Frederick Douglass Jr., Charles Raymond Douglass, and Annie Douglass. Frederick Douglass would go on to stamp his ghost status the rest of his life and beyond his death. Thank you for tapping in. I appreciate you for your time. I send all my love to all the people. One love, one people.